Hi all, and welcome to Opinion Nation, where I give you my opinion and you share yours. Today I am going to be talking about Brexit. Brexit being something that has been in the news constantly for the last number of months since the referendum. Obviously in the news of late we've just had the Conservative Party conference, the usual negative narrative of the media about how bad everything is going. One of the latest things that the media seems to be extending is that nothing has been achieved. Well, my answer to that is I don't really believe it. How do we know really what's been achieved? I mean, if you think about it logically, the negotiators are not going to be telling us everything that they're doing. Because that's the point of negotiation. You keep your cards close to your chest and you try and get the best deal possible. I am sick and tired of the media's negative narrative around this subject. Constantly, every day, there is some headline that says this is such a bad thing, nothing's being done, etc., etc. And this is why people are getting so uptight about it. Before the referendum, the media was all for not leaving the EU. You could see that just by the way they were doing things. And now that we chose to leave, they are desperately trying to get everyone to feel terrible about it. Well, I think we really need to stop listening to this negative narrative and start thinking logically and actually perhaps do a little bit of digging of our own and find the truth about what is happening. Now, also, I think in general the public and possibly the media don't quite realise just how big a job this is. In order that all parties are satisfied, because we want the EU to be future trading partners of ours and we want to remain friends with them. So obviously both sides need to be satisfied with the breakup, as it were. But this is very difficult because although the EU sort of says yes, we're one unified group, they're not. So essentially we've got to negotiate things with 20 plus different countries and get that done within 2 years. And at the same time, the government of this country and the other countries still have to run their countries. So it's very complicated. And we need to know that not all of these negotiations are going to be public knowledge. It's impossible, and if you think about it, it would be ridiculous. So, we need to realise that these negotiations take time, and we're not going to always be privy to the actual what's going on at the actual moment in time. We have to realise that we cannot possibly know everything that's going on. So I think to end on this point, we need to stop listening to the negative narrative painted by the media and realise that obviously our government is doing all it can to get the best deal possible for us. Because why wouldn't they? If they go out and get a crappy deal, then they're not going to get into government again. So obviously it's in their interests to get the best deal. The other thing that is constantly in the news is this business about hard and soft Brexit, and how a hard Brexit is going to be terribly bad for us and a soft Brexit would be much better. Now, you can go and look it up and you can get various sort of definitions of what a hard and a soft Brexit is. And to be perfectly honest, these are just terms that have been coined for the use in headlines as far as I'm concerned. But in general, what I have come to understand as the definition is a hard Brexit means that we're going to just come around at the end of the 2 years and say, okay, fine, we're out. And all contracts, treaties, agreements are cancelled and we have to start from that point renegotiating everything. A soft Brexit is that We get the best deal possible. At the end of the 2 years, everything works out, everything's been negotiated, there's no disruption, and everybody's happy. And that's what I think the definition is. But we need to actually be realistic here. A soft Brexit, let's start with that, is not going to happen. You're not going to have everything hunky-dory at the end of the 2 years. You're not going to have everybody happy, and you're most certainly not going to have, no disruption whatsoever. But the point of what the government is trying to do is trying to make that transition, which is why they're talking about trying to have a transition period, as least disruptive as possible. And what we as individuals and the business owners and such like, we just need to sort of prepare ourselves for some minor disruptions and try to take action accordingly. But I don't believe that it's going to be as bad as the media purports. Then the other one, a hard Brexit. We're just going to come to that time and everything's cancelled, we start negotiating. Well, firstly, again, I think that's highly unlikely, because that would be terribly bad for the EU as well as us. And, it's not going to happen, because it makes no sense. What we as or at least what our government is probably doing, is maybe using that idea as a bit of a bit of leverage, as it were, sort of saying to the EU, if you don't agree to something soon, we're going to end up doing this and it's going to be terribly bad for you. Because I am of the opinion that with the UK leaving the EU, actually it will be worse for the EU than it is for us. It'll be a lot more expensive for the EU. The reason being that they will, in the long term, not have our contributions in funds and various other things. So in the short term, they may be mildly better off, because obviously we have to pay them something to get out of the contract. But in the long term, they're going to suffer. So they need to make contingencies for this. And one of those contingencies will be to keep businesses trade as intact as possible. So they're going to want to negotiate. If they want to negotiate, we should be able to get a good deal. Obviously, it's in our interest certainly to get a good deal, because they are, one of our biggest markets. We have a lot of business in Europe, and Europe has a lot of businesses here. We cannot, as a country, afford to just have that business stop. So, just like the EU cannot afford to have business with Britain stopping, it won't happen. But we are not going to be privy to all the nitty-gritty of the the negotiations. So this media craze of a hard and soft Brexit, and how we're heading for a hard Brexit, etc., etc., is just headline grabbing. It's just, it's almost like warmongering, except I suppose you could call it Brexit mongering. I don't know, but it's rubbish. And the term hard and soft is, as far as I'm concerned, neither here nor there. It's just a headline. It doesn't mean anything. We are going to hopefully have a very happy medium where everybody gives and takes a bit. Yes, there's going to be some disruption, and you cannot get away from that. There's going to be. But it's not going to affect everybody. I mean, what the media seems to love portraying is that our economy is going to go down the tube and everyone's going to be poorer, and all the EU immigrants have to leave the country and all this rubbish. It's not going to happen. Basically, the average man in the street is not going to be affected. because we're still going to get the stuff from the EU, and the EU is still going to get stuff from us. Some prices may go up, but the prices of staple things, bread and milk, etc., it's not going to have a big effect. So we need to stop dwelling on all the negative. I don't get why they have to drum it into the mind of the public that Brexit's going to be a disaster. It's not in the interests of either party for it to be a disaster, and as such, it's not going to happen. We have to start thinking, what is the logical course of action? What would we do if we were the government or the Prime Minister? And when you think of that logically, it's not far too removed that they're going to be thinking in exactly the same way. Now, this divorce bill that the media has so interestingly entitled, yes, we're going to have to give the EU some money to leave, because the EU is going to not have our normal monthly, yearly contributions. So if we just suddenly turn off that tap, you're going to have the economy of the EU spiralling down. Now, if the EU collapses or its economy goes down, it's not going to be able to trade as much, and that will then have a knock-on effect on us, whether we're part of the EU or not. So it is in our interests to keep the EU afloat as much as possible. So we basically are going to have to say, well, okay, this is an amount of money or funds. I mean, it's far more complicated than that. So that you can carry yourselves over so you can redo your budgets. And that's what's going to happen. Now, the point being is, how much money do they need? Obviously, we want to give them as little as possible. But again, it's in our interest to make sure that they don't have big economic hiccups. And it's also in their interest to make sure that we don't. Because again, it's both sides. We might not be part of the EU, but economically there is still a tie. It's still good for both of us to be in good economic shape. We need to stop worrying about the future trade deals and things like that, because as far as I'm concerned, trade with the EU and the deals that have been made thus far are probably going to remain basically the same. Because why wouldn't it? The good trade deals, that is. There's obviously some bad ones that maybe we can get out of. And that's the good thing about leaving, is we can actually say, well, this is good for us, so we'll keep that. It's going to be a bit of give and take. And what this also enables us to do is we now can negotiate with other countries to trade with them and hopefully get better deals on certain items. I mean, we are, or were, a great trading nation. This nation had the biggest empire the world has ever known, based basically on trade. Not talking about all the political and moral stuff about it. That is what happened. We were a great trading nation. And now, although we don't have an empire, we have a lovely organisation called the Commonwealth, which are former colonies and other territories. And they all have something to offer. So if we work towards trading with them, perhaps almost like we were doing with the EU, we actually should be even better off. But no, the media is not going to show any positives on how perhaps we can do that. They just show the negative. So, in effect, to end off this part of the video, I think we need to stop listening to the negative narrative and start thinking how we can make it better. We need to stop believing that it's going to be terribly, terribly bad to leave, and start concentrating on how we can actually make leaving the EU terribly good. And as a nation, if we put our minds to it, we can make this work. And we need to also have faith that whether we like the Conservatives or not, that the government also wants the same thing. Because if they have a happy, or at least a less disruptive exit from the EU, maybe they'll get re-elected. And obviously they want the same as the British people, because it all boils down to the fact that our government are made up of British citizens. We all want the same thing. I believe strongly that this Brexit, as that we've come to call it, is not wholly a bad thing. And we can actually make it work to our advantage. We've just got to ignore the ridiculous media hype that seeks to knock this country and beat down the people of this country, to, you know, basically taking away any sort of pride or hope for the future. There is hope for the future, and we can make this work. We just need to think logically, stop just believing in the headlines and do our own proper little bit of research, and basically keep an eye out, see what happens. But a positive attitude from the nation will actually help us deal with this big issue, and we can, in the long run, make it work. So I'm going to finish now this this video. There is going to be a second video, because basically thus far I've talked mostly about the negative media and some of the economic points. In the next video on this, I'm going to hopefully be talking more on the social issues, and how some of the negative economics, as it were, actually has an effect on the social issues, because obviously one of the big reasons people voted to leave the EU was the taboo subject of immigration, and I think that deserves its own video. As you can see, this video is relatively long, but I feel that the point that I've made in here is stop believing in the headlines and start believing in a positive way that we can do this is important. So this is me signing off for Opinion Nation. I have now given you my opinion. I look forward to hearing yours. If you like this discussion, please comment in the comments, and you can also like and subscribe to this channel, and let us see what our bright future holds. Bye for now. I am now signed off.